All right, guys, I've got two pretty wild theories about the story Bitterblooms, if I'm being honest. So I'm going to try and get through the plot pretty quickly. But first, we do have to talk a little about the timeline and the interregnum. We really don't have an exact idea of when any of these stories that are set on a regressed or fallen planet take place. That's because contact was never reestablished with some of these planets. They got left behind as the rest of the galaxy returned to how things were before the collapse. So while I'm choosing to do my episodes in the chronological order suggested on the Thousand Worlds wiki, I'm not sure if I agree with exactly how each of those stories falls on their timeline. I wonder if, for example, A Song for Leah doesn't take place earlier on the timeline, maybe even before the collapse, and that a story like And Seven Times Never Killed Man might actually take place before the story we're talking about today. The story opens with Sean attempting to bury Lane, who has died in the cold following the aftermath of a vampire attack. She can't bury him because they're in the middle of what's called deep winter, which is very cold, and the ground is frozen. She does make a little bier for him, and by bier I mean like a funeral pyre, and then she sets off back home for Carinhall with very little food. She realizes she took too long trying to bury Lane and won't have time to make it back, and falls asleep. She awakens to a ghostly blue light over the horizon, and after some deliberation, decides to follow it. Next, she encounters a ruined city, and while climbing a cliff, she finds a tiny blue flower with 4 petals, which we will later learn is called a bitterbloom. It's kind of weird. It's got a stem as hard as metal wire. It's native to a different planet, Ymir, and she can't pull it out of the rocks. At the top of the cliffs, she finds what is a long-abandoned spaceport and a starship, which is teardrop-shaped and rests on 3 legs, which are covered by vines and flowers. While she's trying to figure out how to get inside of the ship, a vampire attacks her, and she is rescued by a woman named Morgan. She wakes up in this strange, warm, hazy blue environment that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, and seems to be healed of her injuries. Morgan claims to be an immortal witch, and Sean then remembers a childhood lullaby from old Tisenia about a family named Lyre who live in a metal house called Morganhall, who trap travelers with food of empty stuff made of dreams and air until they starve. Morgan claims several of the legendary and historical figures in the Thousand World universe are her brothers and sisters, including Lilith, Celia Marcyan, Erica Storm-Jones, Lamia Bayless, Deidre Dialarin, Joachim Claronimus, Stephen Cobalt Northstar, as well as Tomo and Wahlberg. At some point, we'll talk about all these people. I'm not sure when. Morgan uses advanced holographs on a view screen to show Sean other worlds and create simulated environments to keep Sean trapped there. She even simulates a gathering, which is when families will meet following the deep winter every 10 years to find outside matches for their family members to bring in new DNA. Morgan will occasionally leave throughout Sean's captivity and return after short periods of time. And during one of these returns, Morgan has frost flowers and bitterblooms, despite the fact that they're currently supposed to be in deep space and not landed on a planet. When Sean goes to fetch a mirror, she steps on the wet rug, and putting two and two together, she realizes that Morgan has been tricking her this entire time, and she is in fact still on the same planet where the story starts. Sean demands all of her stuff and lots of food. She threatens to break the view screen when Morgan resists, and returns to her family at Carinhall. Sean discovers she has been missing for over a year. Initially, they don't believe her story, but she produces bitterblooms from her hair, forcing Craig, the voice of Carinhall, that's their leader, to begrudgingly believe at least some aspects of her story. She becomes a trader and travels all over the planet and has several children, but remains haunted by her memories and is not a happy person. Decades later, during the fourth deep winter of her life, Sean realizes a famine is imminent. To spare the current voice, who is a much more gentle person than Craig, the burden of ordering her death, the elderly Sean steals food and skis and returns to the ruined city. Sean finds the ship exactly as she left it. Having now learned to read, she does now notice that the ship is named the Morgan Le Fay from the planet Avalon. She calls out to Morgan before falling asleep in the snow, and the story ends somewhat ambiguously. And while I enjoy ambiguous endings, I think the whole point is to attempt to solve them. And what I think we've got here is a good old-fashioned time loop. I think that by the end of the story, Sean is Morgan. There is one overt connection in the text, and that is when Morgan comes back with the Bitterblooms and puts them into Sean's hair after months of captivity and says, "You look like me now." So they have some physical resemblance, and that would be some amazing literary irony. But I think there's a lot of other evidence scattered throughout this story. The first thing I noticed is that Sean discovers the name of the ship, Morgan Le Fay, at the very end of the story. If she were then to enter the ship and finds out how to work any advanced technology that might be in there, put a pin in that, then she now has a sort of seed for her new identity as Morgan. Morgan has been able to name all of these famous figures from the holotapes on the ship and shared these with Sean, but also Sean has just spent her lifetime as a trader traveling the world and is the favorite storyteller at Carinhall. One of the places she would have visited would have been Allen House, so she'd be able to explain that to herself. Sean also obviously remembers her kin at Carinhall, Lynn, Eris, Kaith, and even Beth, having now read the journal that Beth left behind, that Morgan claims to know at the start of the story. So she would have the exact set of skills and knowledge she needs to become a Morgan for the next younger Sean. The story starts in the 8th year of Deep Winter, and Sean is a captive for over a year, meaning that's almost 10 years. So if Sean, now Morgan, at the end of the story only has to wait a little bit for the next Sean to arrive, that could establish the cycle of, quote, Sean is my lover every 10th year at gathering. In a loop, Morgan, the old Sean, would be waiting for the next Sean, the younger version, to arrive, reenacting the cycle that she herself experienced. I think the flash of bright light that Sean experiences at the beginning of the story is actually Morgan Sean accidentally starting the time loop. To cut to the chase, I think there is a healing tank that employs time travel technology and it might be defective. The vats were undoubtedly where the cell samples were tended and grown to maturity. Lion had told him about the Chrono Warp as well, that vanished secret of the Earth Imperials, a field that could literally warp the fabric of time itself, albeit only in a small area, and at vast cost in energy. That way, the clones could be brought to maturity in hours, or held, unchanging and alive, for millennia. Haviland Tough considered the work area, the computer station, and Mushroom, whose small body he still carried. Cloning began with a single cell. The techniques were no doubt stored in the computer. Perhaps there was even an instruction program. Indeed, Haviland Tough announced to himself. It seemed quite logical. A literate Sean would have a very different experience on board the ship. She'd be able to follow any programs or read any instructions that might remain functional. While it seems that the ship is unable to fly and perhaps damaged, obviously some of the technology on board works, including the view screen and a couple of other things I would argue exist, including a cloning tank. It was blue, all blue, hazy, shifting blue. A pale blue, dancing, like the ghost light that had flickered on the sky. A soft blue, like the little flower, the impossible blossom by the riverbank. A cold blue, like the eyes of the ice wagon's black driver, like Lane's lips when last she kissed them. Blue, and it moved and would not be still. Everything was blurred, unreal. There was only blue. For a long time, only blue. She found herself relaxing, floating. All her limbs turned to water, lazy water, though it was deep winter and she knew she should be ice. Soft hands began to touch her, lifting her head, pulling off her face mask, so the blue warm brushed her naked cheeks, then drifting lower, loosening her clothes, stripping her of furs and cloth and leather, off with her belt, and off with her jerkin, and off with her pants. Her skin tingled. She was floating. Everything was warm, so warm, and the hands fluttered here and there, and they were so gentle, like old Mother Tisenia had been, like her sister Leela was sometimes, like Devon, like Lane, she thought, and it was a pleasant thought, comforting and arousing at the same time, and Sean held close to it. She was with Lane, she was safe and warm, and she remembered his face, the blue in his lips, the ice in his beard, where his breath had frozen. The pain burned into him, twisting his features like a mask. She remembered, and suddenly she was drowning in the blue, choking on the blue, struggling, screaming. Look, I think it was like the 5th time that I read this story that I realized what was going on here, but I don't know how you can interpret that as anything but Sean floating in a vat of water. Haviland Tough then sedated him and confined him within the Ark's Chrono Warp tank, where the same great energies that warped the fabric of space could be used to do strange things to time. It was the last and greatest secret of the Earth Imperials, Tough claimed, and had been lost virtually everywhere else. He used it to bring his clones to full maturity in a matter of days, and now he used it to age Jamie Crean, and incidentally heal his broken arms in hours. Either Morgan has put Sean in the Chrono Warp tank to heal her, or to spin up an entirely new clone of Sean. And you might be wondering, if a new clone could have memories, well, they can. In Night Flyers, Royd Eris's mother has her memory imprinted onto a crystal matrix computer, which then runs the ship. In fact, Joachim Claronimus actually has his mind transferred into a cyborg body using a crystal matrix. And he tells us that these memories can be erased or modified. There are whisper jewels in which a specific memory can be etched onto a gem by a psionic talent called an Esper. I actually think this is what's going on with the scarf that Morgan puts around Sean's neck, but I'll talk about that in a bit. And then in the Corpse Handler trilogy, which may or may not be in this exact version of the Thousand Worlds, we'll talk about it when we get there. Corporations create what they call synthobrains inside of corpses, and that's a sort of pseudo-mind that allows a controller to take control of a corpse. These corpse handlers project their will into the bodies. And while it's not, what I'm about to describe is not a permanent memory transfer, the handler experiences echoes of the corpse's sensory inputs. I'm pretty sure that's not what's going on here, but I figured I'd include it along with this next bit just to be thorough. I think the sooner you understand all of the various technologies and processes that are in the Thousand Worlds, the sooner you can start unraveling what's going on in these stories. So I hope you'll indulge me. In the story The Runners, we learn about a couple of things. One, we learn that a master probe can install a mind block or barrier inside of someone's memory, effectively locking their memories away. We also learn that it is possible to entirely wipe someone's brain. The only point here is that these memory altering processes are not limited to functioning through the use of crystals. They can work on meat brains too. It just requires a talented psychic. Interestingly enough, the character that's having their memory wiped in The Runners has also been subject to something called a quote-unquote rejuve, which seems to extend their body's life well past the natural limits. I'm going to go ahead and assume that that happens in a Chrono Warp tank. And I don't believe Morgan at all when she says the food is what lets her live longer. And while I'm leaning on this story being a time warp that doesn't include cloning, I just want to look at one final quote just so we get a full picture of how all this works. After 30 years of flying the ship alone, she was bored. I was to be her companion and lover. She could shape me to be a perfect diversion. She had no patience with children, however, and no desire to raise me herself. After she had done the cloning, I was sealed in a nurturant tank, an embryo linked into her computer. It was my teacher, before birth and after. I had no birth, really. Long after the time a normal child would have been born, I remained in the tank, growing, learning, on slow time, blind and dreaming and living through tubes. I was to be released when I had attained the age of puberty, at which time she guessed I would be fit company. So you can read the end of the story and believe that Sean dies in the snow, or maybe that a 120-year-old Morgan, I guess it's possible, opens the starship up and lets her in, or you can believe my theory, where Sean goes inside, accidentally activates the chrono warp, and since it's defective, it actually causes some sort of big blue explosion, rips a hole in time, and sends her back in time to the start of the story, as Morgan ready to meet Sean. Now we need to talk about Morgan and what she's wearing. You're tired, child. The vampire hurt you, and you don't remember. But you will remember. You will. I'm not afraid of you, Sean, Morgan said. Not you, my Sean, my lover. She moved around the sword easily, and took off the scarf she wore. A gossamer of gray spider silk, set with tiny crimson jewels, to drape it around Sean's neck. See, I know what you are thinking, she said, pointing to the jewels. One by one, they were changing color. Fire became blood, blood crusted over and turned to brown, brown faded to black. You are frightened of me, nothing more, no anger. You would never hurt me. She tied the scarf neatly under Sean's face mask and smiled. And then a bit later, Morgan began to undo the scarf she had fastened round Sean's neck. The stones were black and frightening. No, Sean Carin, she said evenly. We are not dead. Live here with me, child, and you will never die. You'll see. She pulled off the scarf and started unlacing the thongs of Sean's face mask. When it was loose, she pulled it up and off the girl's head, tossing it casually to the floor. You are pretty, Sean. You have always been pretty, though. I remember all those years ago. I remember. So the scarf seems to function as some sort of technologically advanced mood ring, reflecting the emotions that Sean is feeling. But I do think that it could be a whisper jewel. It's definitely similar, and maybe the difference, or apparent difference, is because it's being psionically etched right now. That's right. I think there's a goddamn Githyanki soul suck hiding on that ship. Maybe. To refresh your memory if you need it, the Githyanki are one of the slave races of the Harangans, often termed soul sucks. They are barely sentient, malevolent, and potent telepaths. The Githyanki were capable of bending and twisting human minds, sending false visions, hallucinations, and dreams, strengthening the animal side of man and warping judgment and reason, all for the end of turning brother against sister. That being said, I don't think the Githyanki are necessarily as evil as the characters in these stories would have you believe. Having read almost all of George R.R. Martin's works, I just don't think he would make creatures, even if only barely sentient, that are flat out evil. I think what's more likely happened is that the planet that Bitterblooms is set on had the Harangan slave races landed there, but so much time has passed that these slave races are struggling to survive along with the humans. In fact, this might be the only Githyanki left on the planet. And I don't think it's Morgan, but it could be. I think it's in one of the locked rooms on the ship that Sean can't access. Or else it's encoded into the crystal matrix computer of the ship, just like Royd Eris's mother in Night Flyers. And Morgan is essentially its thrall. That makes it pretty funny when Sean says that Morgan killed the vampire, because I'm pretty sure the vampires in this story are dactyloids, another one of the Harangan slave races. And if there is a vampire here, it's the Githyanki Soulsuck. For the name of the metal hall was Morgan Hall, Tisenya told the children. And the family who lived there was the family named Liar, whose food is empty stuff made of dreams and air. George R.R. Martin wants us to think that this is a warning about Fae food, but come on, it's a sci-fi story. Morgan feeds people in the spaceship, keeps them there with false visions, and the Githyanki's food is their soul, the dreams. It's an intentional misdirect, and my gosh, if you're going to read these stories, you better get used to those. All right, so before I move on to the next thing, what I'm trying to say here is I think that the Githyanki has had Morgan capture the memories of Sean with the scarf. Again, this is if my time warp theory's not right, so that Morgan can get all of the memories of Sean to make the trap more convincing, or perhaps a Githyanki can suck the memories out of Whisper Jewels as sustenance. Or, I don't know, use them to educate new Morgan clones using the cloning tank. Look, I get it. This all seems really far-fetched. But before I read the next quote, I just want to remind you that Morgan uses glowstone rings on all of her fingers to control the ship. The clamor had pulled him from a troubled sleep. He had stopped them just on the edge of the forest, and now the bitter speaker had turned to face him, looking fierce and hard and most ungenshi-like, with the laser slung across her shoulders. A bright blue glitter silk scarf knotted around her neck, and fat glowstone rings on all 8 of her fingers. That's a quote from And 7 Times Never Kill Man, a story where I am almost positive that the Genshi are actually Githyanki. If they're not Githyanki, they are a Federal Empire experiment on Githyanki. But, we'll get there. Without recounting absolutely everything that happens in And 7 Times Never Kill Man, at the end of the story, one of the Genshi leaves the planet on an Avalonian-made spacecraft that is described identically to the one in Bitterblooms, based out of Jameson's world, where many of the specific gifts that appear in this story also appear on the trading ship in And 7 Times Never Kill Man. One of the voice Karens in this story is named Janice. The trader in And 7 Times Never Kill Man is named Janice Ryther. Look, I know the ships have different names, but, maybe they landed here and moved to a different ship. There's just so many artifacts and 2 similar characters and a shared name between these stories. And it could explain a lot of the mystery of this story. I just found too many little bits of evidence to not share the theory. If you think you can strengthen or discredit my theory, please do. I don't care if I'm wrong. I just want to know what's going on in this story. That ship from And 7 Times Never Kill Man is called the Lights of Jolo Star. It has glitter silk in it, and I actually believe that's the same material that Morgan's scarf is made out of. It's carrying glowstone jewelry as well as the glowstone rings that the Genshi is wearing. In Bitterblooms, Morgan gives Sean a glowstone bracelet. Those come from Cavalon, by the way. She also gives her the flexible metal boots and night vision goggles, which could easily be found on Bastion or the Steel Angel base. Those guys are from Bastion in And 7 Times Never Kill Man. Morgan also gives Sean books and music cubes from Avalon, a mirror from Jameson's world, oils from Break, metal miniatures representing men, women, and various demons from Chul Damien, bags of fragrant spices from Rhiannon, Tara, and Old Poseidon, and finally, a slow golden liquor that brought forgetfulness when Sean needed it, and she doesn't know where it's from, but That is Amberlith from the Forgotten Colony of Lethaland. I'll just point out here, since I didn't earlier, that each of these gifts has a story attached to it by Morgan. Don't forget, Sean is a storyteller. At the very least, both the Morgan Le Fay and the Lights of Jolostar could have connected in Jameson's world. All right, Flora and Fauna. We've got the quote-unquote vampires. They are gaunt, black shadows, taller than a man, with loose skin that flaps over skeletal limbs, like dark cloaks, concealing their claws. They're incredibly fast, capable of running across snow as quickly as an arrow in flight. And they have infrared vision, allowing them to hunt in total darkness. So, like I said, I think these are dactyloids. And, we never see a dactyloid. So I kind of suspect that maybe they just glide and they're not true flyers. They get dropped out of a spaceship and glide down into the middle of cities. And, if they leap off a building or a cliff or something, it's not like the humans actually. Well, I think there are altered men with wings, but I don't think they're soldiers. It's not like the TEF guys fly either. They have hip rockets, which I assume just let them jump really far. So these would be similar. There are wind wolves, but that's really all we know about them. There are summer spinners, which we also hear nothing about, but they make webs. So I'm going to assume they're spiders. There are the blackbark trees, which are massive, sturdy trees. The one Sean sleeps against is 3 meters across. There's another wood called thistlewood, and it's prized for its sweet fragrance, and they like to burn it in the hearth at Carinhall. Obviously, we got the Bitterblooms. Those are tiny, 4-petaled blue flowers. They have thick black stems as strong as metal wire. In fact, I kind of wonder if they might actually just be cameras. At least the ones in this story, or at least the one that Sean can't pull off of the cliff. It would explain how Morgan is able to track Sean, and it would explain how Morgan can show the cliff and the river that Sean crossed on the view screen. In Dying of the Light, Gwen uses sensor implants the size of a thumbnail to spy on the local ecology. They are actually native to Ymir. Also, the frost flowers are native to Ymir, but they are large, brightly colored blossoms. They do also grow on thick, twisting black vines. And finally, we have silverwood trees because Lane's bow is made out of silverwood. That is a very popular tree in this galaxy. We'll talk about it some other time. I thought I was done, but there's a lot that I feel like I need to talk about right now. It is less scripted, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I think obviously this story has a lot of themes of fire and ice, but before I talk about that, I want to talk about the voice first. This is the title given to the leader of the people of Carinhall, but it also appears in another story, Dying of the Light. The arcology city there, Challenge, is run by the Voice. That's an artificial intelligence that handles all of the administration of Challenge and provides entertainment for the people living there. I actually think it's quite possible that the world that Carinhall is set on used to have artificial intelligences managing their cities, and they are, in effect, a kind of cargo cult where they have created a voice to tell them what to do, just like the AI used to. And this, by the way, is a parallel to Julian James's theory of the bicameral mind, which in a nutshell says that we, in our world as humans, weren't really what we'd call conscious. We had a voice in our brain telling us what to do, often interpreted as God. But as society became more complex, we actually had to develop consciousness to fully and meaningfully interact with each other. And because Carinhall also appoints a storyteller, old John, Tisenia, and Sean, so it's not just voice Beth and voice Craig and Devin. They have these two opposed positions, and they're both necessary. And this separation of the functions of survival and entertainment, of preservation and consumption, hate and desire, of ice and fire, is very important to George and necessary for the survival of our society. Just like how after the incidents on the Electo in Warship, the Federal Empire found out it had to separate the more creative problem-solving, decision-making parts of the spaceship computer from the executive parts. We learn this in The Plague Star, the first tough voyaging story, where a android takes control of the computer systems in the ship. Anatos is killed just as he begins interfacing with the Ark. "Fool," I said, "and fool it is," Anatos told him. His laughter was a horrible sound. It was full of pain and metallic echoes, and his lips were bleeding freely, leaving wet red smears on those shining silver teeth. "You killed me, Nevis, and for nothing. For impatience. I could have given it all to you. It's empty, Nevis. The ship is empty. They're all dead, and the system is empty too. I'm alone in here. No other mind in the circuit. It's an idiot, Kaj Nevis. The Ark is an idiot giant. They were afraid, those Earth Imperials. They'd achieved true artificial intelligence. Oh yes, they had their great AI warships and robot fleets, but those AIs had minds of their own, and there were incidents." So in his works, George has separated these two functions thematically as the elements of ice and fire, socially as voice and storyteller, and also as body and mind, and sometimes a hand. A well-functioning society needs a storyteller to build the myth that instructs its people on why they need to follow the commands of the voice. And that as much as it might want to, that pragmatic, icy part of society and people that makes the hard decisions necessary for survival might not value the storyteller, the dreamer, and want to be rid of them. It can't, because they find ways to remanifest. In the case in this story, it's because the dreamers of the society are susceptible to the psionic dreams of the Githyanki that lure them to the ship, where they in turn feed the Githyanki, allowing it to project more dreams to lure the next dreamer in a cycle. The characters in the stories might try to separate these things, divide them into ice and fire, and ignore them. We might view it as a horror story, but it is nature. It's an ecology in George R.R. Martin's works that continues to influence the same society it draws its dreamers from through their dreams and their stories. So I'm saying that the ship's current thrall consumes the holotapes, influencing the emotions that the Githyanki feeds on and flavor the dreams that it then projects out. When Morgan revives Sean, Sean hears a language that she doesn't understand, but it does remind her of Tisenia's stories because it has a similar lullaby-like quality to it. John's stories are more violent and focused on like warrior ethos. The storytellers, the dreamers, are more susceptible to certain types of dreams. Say Morgan watches one of the Deidre Dialarin tapes. This is an allusion, by the way, to Deidre of the Sorrows, the tragic heroine from the Ulster cycle of Irish mythology, who lost her love interest to war. She would know lullabies because she has children. So if these holotapes are telling, a complete story, like it's a movie with a similar story, then they very well could include her singing lullabies to her children that Tesenia would then pick up on in the dream. Remember that Sean doesn't recognize the language. That makes sense, because if these are tapes left over from the pre-collapse, and this planet has been left on its own for hundreds or thousands of years, there would be a linguistic drift, and they would no longer be able to understand Galactic Standard, certainly not without a lot of study. Similarly, if these tapes cover the whole career of somebody like Stephen Cobalt Northstar, they're going to include oaths and battles and people dying and avenging comrades, just like John's stories. And the flip side of the pragmatic, efficient, survivalist preserving ice is a passionate, dreaming, desirous fire. It provides motivation beyond mere survival, but it also consumes the mind of those who indulge it. And this, as George sees it, is the human condition, to be trapped between these two fates. We'll talk about it in other stories like A Song for Laia, but in this story, Sean is the character that embodies an awareness of the human condition in a way that no one else in her society does. Sean is fully conscious of just how meaningless and unfulfilling her life is. She's not happy. Seeing that she has to choose between survival without passion and dreams without consciousness, she chooses to thread the needle anyway. She finds a way to leave a legacy. She chooses to have children. She lives her life anyway. And that's why the story is called Bitterblooms. Just like Sean, the flowers inhabit the liminal space between ice and fire, between survival and dreaming. "Morgan!" she shouted. "It's Sean!" The wind whipped her words away from her. "Let me in, Morgan. Lie to me, Morgan full of magic. I'm sorry. Lie to me and make me believe." There was no answer. Sean dug herself a hollow in the snow and sat down to wait. She was tired and hungry, and dusk was close at hand. Already she could see the driver's ice-blue eyes staring through the wispy clouds of twilight. When at last she slept, she dreamt of Avalon. So yeah, I think this is absolutely top-tier George, one of his best works, and embodies all of the themes that you will find in the rest of his stories. Thanks again to Birdchest, who brought these characters to life. Thank you very much for letting me rant about one of my favorite stories. I hope that you will like and subscribe, and next week we will be talking about In the House of the Worm.